Well, as we've already heard, a bit of a mixed reception for Boris Johnson's conference speech. Economically illiterate, treating firms like an endless sponge. Those were the words used by some think tanks and business leaders as they united in criticism of Boris Johnson's Conservative conference speech. Well, far from the Prime Minister's upbeat rhetoric about levelling up the country, they're warning that his vision would only serve to level down and put the fragile recovery from the pandemic at risk. Well, joining me now is one of those critics, Matthew Lesh. He's the head of research at the Adam Smith Institute, came up with that economically illiterate term. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Lesh. Could you just explain why, when a Tory Prime Minister stands up and says he wants higher wages, higher productivity, he likes business, he's being economically illiterate?
Look, Boris's rhetoric was certainly stirring and entertaining, but when it came down to policy detail, it was largely vacuous. And in terms of a lot of the claims, I think I certainly stand by the notion that it was economic illiterate. And Boris talks about wanting a low-tax economy, but we're on track for the highest tax burden since the Attlee post-war socialist government. He says he wants a high-wage economy, but that actually requires productivity increments. And in practice, all we have right now is labour shortages, and we're risking a massive inflationary spike. The truth of it is that you cannot get to a high-wage, high-productivity economy with a highly regulated, high-tax economy, one that is failing to fill skills shortages, failing to fill the gaps, and having serious supply-side issues. And unfortunately, when it came to the government's actual agenda, there's a lot to be disappointed about.
But isn't the basic argument that business has relied on cheap labour, a lot of it immigrant labour, and has therefore got away with paying low salaries and having bad conditions, for example, in the haulage industry, and that if those workers aren't there, if business wants to carry on, it will have to pay more to those workers and improve their conditions? I mean, what's wrong with that argument?
Look, that's certainly the argument. It was just never fundamentally true. Immigration does not substantially or meaningfully reduce people's wages overall. In fact, immigrants, if anything, because they bring in certain skills that otherwise aren't in the economy, actually increase productivity. If there were thousands, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who were willing to do these jobs domestically, then they would have easily been filled right now. But unfortunately, partly as a result of COVID, because a lot of people, about 1 million Europeans left the country, and then partly as a result of the government's immigration policies that they can't come back and the skill shortage. Now,
yeah, but what the Prime Minister is saying, that the reason why people in this country wouldn't do those jobs was because they weren't paid enough. That basically the workers coming in, the immigrant workers, were prepared to be exploited where British workers aren't. And he's saying, actually, if there was better pay, then we'd find that workforce. Does that work?
Look, I don't think it's working in practice. You can try to pay road hauliers more in the short run, but of course that's just going to be fed along throughout the economy in inflationary spikes unless you have actually increased productivity. So we're all going to be paying more for goods right across the board. So we're actually not going to be any better off as a result of some people getting, in some places, getting higher wages. So it doesn't seem like a particularly stable way forward. What you need is productivity improvements if you want wage increases, and that just simply isn't going to happen by starving the economy of immigration, and it's certainly not going to happen at the moment. Also, I think the government's, in a sense, taking too much credit here for something that's bad. This is a global problem. We have labour shortages right across the world in post-COVID. Basically, the demand side of the economy has come roaring back, but on the supply side, COVID was quite a shock, and we're struggling to keep up with production. That's happening absolutely everywhere. That's partly got to do with the government's immigration policies, but partly just a broader issue that I don't know why the government wants to take credit for and celebrate what is quite a kind of dire situation in a lot of industries. I think it's quite a bad strategy in a sense.
OK, so if we accept that we are where we are, that Britain has left the European Union, Brexit's happened, we have these labour shortages, we want more productivity and high wages, what is the economically literate way of achieving that?
Look, it's certainly not increasing taxes right at the time of the economy is trying to recover. And then it's looking at the underlying kind of macroeconomic supply side reforms. I think one of the most substantial ones, and unfortunately the Prime Minister's put aside, would be reforming the planning system. We have a situation where people can't live nearby where they're most productive, or if they do live in a city, a lot of their wage is lost in housing. So we need massive housing and planning reform so we can build homes so that people can have a higher quality and standard of life and people can be more economically productive. I think we also, now that we've left the European Union, there's a huge opportunity to look at the regulatory state, to go back through all those regulations we were blindly accepting from the EU, and now we can say, is that appropriate for our economy? We've seen some good news on that when it comes to gene editing, but I think there's a lot more to be done on the regulatory front that could really boost our economy in the long run. Some of it's not always going to be that popular, but it is necessary actions the government can take.
Mr. Lesh, thank you very much indeed for joining us. A new head of the armed forces has been appointed. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin is